Hello, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon session of the Southeast Asia Development Symposium. My name is Josephine Aquino, Associate Knowledge Management Officer in ADB. On behalf of the Secretariat, we thank you for joining us this afternoon. We will now jump into our session titled Knowledge Management and Innovation in Action, Transforming Policymaking for a Sustainable Southeast Asia. We will highlight the important role of knowledge management and innovation in guiding governments in formulating their national long-term development plans. After the session, we hope you'll have a better understanding or changed perspective of what knowledge management and innovation are and how critical they are in achieving our development goals. We will kick off our conversation about how knowledge management plays in the constantly changing development landscape. May I now present to you Dr. Susan Roth, Chief of Knowledge Management in ADB, and Dr. Andreas Bragner, Founder and Executive Director of Knowledge for Development Partnerships. Susan and Andreas, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joe. It's a great pleasure to be here together with Andreas. As we heard this morning during the conference, collaboration, partnerships need to be at the heart of the recovery and the transformation of our economies. And of course, collaboration partnerships are not possible without good knowledge management. So what we do in knowledge management is really at the heart of development transformation. And we do hope that you walk out of the session and get very excited about this and about collaboration opportunities. So what we wanted to do in this first conversation now, and I'm so glad to have Andreas here, is what does it actually mean? And I'm starting with this question, which is a bit provocative in a way. And the question is, did we or have we and are we supporting countries sufficiently in their knowledge management agenda to achieve their national development goals? Right? It's easy to throw money at development problems, but actually, are we supporting them enough from a knowledge management perspective? So Andreas, if you can share some of your thoughts and maybe examples, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation with you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you all for the invitation to this wonderful event. And also this shows how much ADB is doing to promote knowledge management in the context of development. And ADB, in fact, has been at the forefront of knowledge management for long, with a comprehensive and strategic knowledge management program, which is really very impressive. Even more, the recent development in the last years are really relevant. Specifically, I would like to highlight the country knowledge programming, saying that the development of countries requires also the strategic development of knowledge on a national level. And I would say that this is specifically something that goes beyond what other development partners do, because knowledge management as such, with all these practices of lessons learned within an organization and handover and so on, repositories in the ministries, etc., all this is important, but the national perspective of knowledge management is yet inadequately addressed. But with the country program of ADB, this is now coming to a higher level, and this is really fantastic. Maybe knowledge management in Asia has a very good standing because Asian cultures always had a strong interest in knowledge. The saying, investment in knowledge pays the best interest, is said to originate from Asia. And really, I would say that this is, although it's thousands of years old, this saying, it is so true in the context of development, but also on the global level. Really, we have to say that there is a rapidly increasing awareness of the impact of knowledge on development. Just recently, last year, KM has been defined as the top priority in the UN learning strategy. And also the development partners all over the world, the national ones, understand that the achievement of the SDGs mainly and substantially depends on knowledge and the ability to use it for the benefit of development. Because without knowledge, and that is very clear and somehow intuitive, without the knowledge and the capacity to achieve the goals, money alone will not do. This is a critical moment. Finally, also the scientific evidence, and there is so much of evidence, you could fill libraries about that, show that knowledge has the highest impact on the achievement of the SDGs. So
so maybe if I can build on that, how do successful knowledge management systems in governments look like? We will hear later from Narissa from the National Economic Development Agency how they are approaching knowledge management. But can you talk a bit also about the knowledge management stakeholders in governments or in countries? Not in governments, in countries actually.
Well, in the ministries, of course, knowledge management with more, let's say, overarching and integrative approach going beyond the ministries. And I would say that the selection of stakeholders or knowledge partners for a national knowledge approach should always be related to a national knowledge agenda. Because whatever you want to achieve, you need the organizations and partners to implement it. In general, of course, that will include the governments and also public bodies, private sector, NGOs, businesses, and the typical knowledge institutions like science, education, media, etc. But if you define in a knowledge agenda that, for instance, knowledge inclusion is a major topic for your country development, leaving no one behind, then you should include these institutions in your knowledge partnership. Let's say reaching out to the farmers that are far away from the typical knowledge institutions with limited access to internet, electricity, maybe lack of knowledge skills. Then, of course, you have to include these farmers and all the special interest group. We don't have to go to the disabled people. Even women have still not the same access to knowledge in Asia. And so we have to include these interest groups in a knowledge partnership. But it's not only about the social context, let's say the business context. If a country says we want to strengthen the technology and knowledge acquisition in prioritized lead industries, then of course you need to involve the businesses of these lead industries in your knowledge partnership and define the way how to acquire the knowledge as fast as possible. And I think that this is a critical approach. Without a strategy,
yes,
you're always going to the wrong direction, or you will never go the right direction, as we say.
Or not effectively. Maybe, Andreas, to that point on you need a strategy, you need a reason to collaborate, you need a reason or a kind of a mission to manage knowledge. Can you share some of the work you've been doing in some of the African countries where, especially in the agriculture sector, they wanted to manage knowledge for a certain goal and they brought stakeholders together and developed a knowledge strategy, which also then allowed partnerships?
Right. In the last months of 2021, we implemented a so-called Knowledge Management for Agricultural Development Challenge that was led by the Pan-African CAPEX organization, FARA. And we brought together 30 country representatives of African countries to, first of all, train them, but also to identify the key challenges in the agricultural knowledge ecosystem and to develop solutions. And at the end of this process, we presented and declared with signatures of all continental partners the knowledge management for agricultural development agenda. So that was a big success. And one of them, by the way, let me please highlight this, is that if we have an agenda, we also need to dedicate resources. Because whatever is important, seriously, you need to dedicate resources. And one of the elements is to establish a knowledge fund for the development of knowledge in the agricultural sector. Just consider 80% of the people in Africa are living from agriculture.
So many other countries too.
And in Asia,
the idea of a knowledge fund. Yeah, exactly. So the question with this knowledge fund, is there any example of a country which has something like a knowledge fund, a knowledge ministry, or a knowledge foundation that actually targets financing of efforts to knowledge ecosystem building and knowledge management?
Here again, we have to go back to Asia, unfortunately. Africa, that is not.
Or fortunately,
United Arab Emirates is one of the countries with a very clear strategic orientation towards knowledge. They declared years ago to transform their economy from an oil economy into a knowledge economy. And they established institutions following this approach. They have established a knowledge ministry. They have established a knowledge foundation that is explicitly dedicated to the development of knowledge in the country. And you can see the success of the country.
Yes.
I mean, this is very serious. They are organizing a knowledge summit. By the way, it is taking place exactly
this
these
week.
days.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, for Europeans, I think Asia starts already there. For us, not yet. It's a bit further geographically further down, but it doesn't matter. But I think it's an important example in terms of establishing knowledge foundations and knowledge ministries and ecosystems for countries which want to move knowledge economies, right? You could always say, well, that's for higher income countries. How would you counter this argument that this is for higher income countries and lower income countries might not have to focus yet on knowledge economy, knowledge foundations, and knowledge agendas?
You see, when we had the shift from the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals, the surprise was that all these topics like poverty reduction is not only for the developing countries, but it's also for the industrialized countries. And the same is for the knowledge agenda. It's not only for the rich countries, it's exactly the same for the developing countries. Without knowledge, there is no development. The industrialized countries, Europe, I can speak about Europe because I'm European, has always put knowledge at the very top of its development. And to a certain extent, I can tell my colleagues in Europe, if you really, really want to help the Asian countries to develop, you should help them to develop knowledge, because this is the only way to sustainable and self-determined development. If you want to, let's say, help them to suffer at a higher level, then you can still build infrastructures without knowledge. But that
I like that. Andreas, this is a great segue to our next passage. I think it goes both ways, right? Because many concepts are actually emerging from Asia, and other countries can learn from Asia many interesting and positive concepts, especially as we move now to transitioning economies, energy transition, education reforms, and so on. So I think what we all agree is that there are huge opportunities to collaborate on knowledge. And in order to do that well, we need to manage knowledge well. And with that, I thank you, Andreas. This is just the beginning of more conversations with you and on the discussions in the bank, how we can invest in knowledge funds, foundations, and of course, in knowledge agendas together with countries. I'm handing back over again to Joe, and Joe will continue with the agenda. Thank you, Andreas.
Thank you for the conversation, Susan.
Thank you, Susan and Andreas. What resonated me with the conversation is the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals is mainly and substantially through knowledge and knowledge management, and the appreciation that money cannot do it alone. So it's very important that we have a knowledge strategy, because we need to address this many bottlenecks and, of course, challenges in the overall knowledge management ecosystem. And then, of course, a strategic knowledge management at the national level, and having dedicated resources, because as Andreas rightly said, without knowledge, there's no development. So next, we moving on to our session. Following the approval of the ADB Knowledge Management Action Plan last year, 2021-2025, ADB has been focusing on providing demand-driven knowledge support to developing member countries. So to keep abreast of what countries need, my colleague Jane Caranal San Jose, Senior Knowledge Management Officer, will talk about ADB's Dynamic Country Knowledge Programming. Over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Joe. Chawaju, salamat siang, salamat petang, sawadi tombay, magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. Good afternoon, Southeast Asia. Good afternoon to our global audience. Speaking the same language, being on the same page, having a common appreciation of what we can do and work together to be able to help each other attain sustainable development is really the substance of ADB's Knowledge Management Action Plan. The K-MAP enhances effective collaboration by forging comprehensive knowledge programming together with DMC clients to identify better how ADB can respond to their knowledge needs. As you heard earlier, the development of a country requires the strategic development of knowledge at the national level. Why do we want to produce a dynamic country knowledge plan? Before, ADB was delivering knowledge products and services more randomly. There was really a disconnect. What we want to do is to develop and design a structured knowledge program that aligns and integrates government national objectives with ADB's financing products. We are also moving away from counting knowledge products and services to emphasizing the quality of ADB's knowledge. We are really looking into how ADB's knowledge is helping our developing member countries resolve their development challenges. In a dynamic CKP, the knowledge solutions are not packaged as individual products and services, but a cluster of knowledge outputs that attempt to comprehensively address the developing member countries' problems, needs. For the first time, conversations are being done with our client governments so that the country knowledge plan is developed in a participatory and inclusive fashion. As you can see, the dynamic CKP is increasingly adopted by several of our country teams. We are already doing this process in 12 DMCs and supporting 11 other countries. There are 4 steps, as mentioned earlier, in producing the dynamic CKP. It's analyze, consult, prioritize, and draft. In the analysis, we try to really look at what ADB's knowledge portfolio is in terms of its alignment with the national development priorities of the government, the priorities of ADB for that country, sector and thematic focus, among others. And in this particular example, as you can see, ADB's knowledge is well aligned with the objectives that it has for the Philippines, as well as pretty much aligned also with the structural reform program that the government put in place during the COVID. There is a renewed focus on health, and we alerted that the need to focus more on industry and trade and on information and technology. Consult. There are 2 ways in which consultations are done. One is through a survey of government's knowledge needs. It's a quick 1-page survey questionnaire. And the other is also to do this through face-to-face consultations, during which we invite representatives from the government, all agencies that are involved as executing and implementing agencies. In that consultation, we also encourage members of the ADB staff to be present so that we can validate as well as discuss thoroughly how ADB can best support the knowledge needs of the government. To prioritize, ADB doesn't have all the resources, and to manage expectations doesn't have all the capacity to meet the government's needs. So we need to prioritize along the lines of, is this aligning with the government's national development priorities or with ADB's strategic objectives for the country? Does ADB has sufficient in-house capacity and resources, as well as comparative advantage, to be able to meet the client's needs? Finally, the draft of the plan is being prepared. We start out with identifying a knowledge outcome that concretizes how, in terms of knowledge, ADB is going to support its strategic objectives for the country, together with outputs that we want to classify along 3 purposes. Is it knowledge that is being shared to increase awareness and evidence-based information to help our policymakers make well-informed decisions? Is it knowledge that seeks to improve the delivery of our programs and projects? Or is it knowledge that helps to enhance capacities and skills? When all the steps are done, this is a sample of the analysis that we had in Vietnam when we tried to match ADB's knowledge supply with what the client countries are needing. And in this particular example, you could see there is really a lot of scope to do in terms of improving project program and service delivery. How can we work better given this dynamic CKP process and to have a more productive engagement? We would really encourage our government planners and ADB staff to participate in the needs and the surveys that we are trying to hold to be able to collect and understand better what the government's needs are. And if you are participating in the knowledge consultations, it really helps a lot to plan and identify common requirements across offices. In as much as knowledge solutions can cut across sectors and themes, we do understand that there could be problems that are running across different agencies as well, and to actively join our knowledge consultations. My presentation ends here. Please, we are inviting you to really look at our social media platform. The conversation and knowledge does not end with the country knowledge program. As we move together with our developing member countries to a journey to become knowledge economies, we are also looking into what we can do together in terms of innovation. And to discuss that process are my colleagues who lead the work on innovation, Vivek Raman and Josephine Aquino. Over to you.
Thank you, Jay. 5 months ago, ADB launched the Innovation Hub during the Knowledge Forum. So Vivek and I will be sharing with you more information about it. But before that, as mentioned by Jane, please do follow us on social media to get insights on and interact with us in developing knowledge solutions for a sustainable future. Why the Innovation Hub? Taking from Jane's presentation, underpinning the need for a better approach to country knowledge programming is the fact that developing countries continuously struggle with complex challenges such as climate change, environmental stress, growing inequalities, and pandemics such as the recent COVID-19. These do not have simple or quick solutions and cannot be addressed by traditional business as usual approaches. There's a need to do things differently and transform the way these complex challenges are being solved. Since 2015, reform initiatives within ADB put innovation on top of ADB's agenda. An innovation working group was convened as a result of Strategy 2020 midterm review in 2015, comprising of new staff with the expectations to bring in new and more innovative ideas. Further strengthening innovation and mainstreaming innovation across ADB's operation under the Strategy 2030, which was approved in 2018. To be able to do all this, ADB has to strengthen internal capacity. And so an organization-wide approach was launched in 2019 with the creation of an innovation task force comprising over 150 staff across ADB. And there was also a survey, both aimed at making an informed decision on how best to move forward the innovation agenda. And so in 2021, last year, ADB launched the Innovation Hub. The hub will lead the shift from traditional to new ways of doing things. It will operationalize the innovation agenda of Strategy 2030, as well as the Knowledge Management Action Plan. I'll now hand you over to Vivek to talk about more on what the Innovation Hub is and what it will offer. Thank you. Over to you, Vivek.
Thank you so much, Joe. Good afternoon, Southeast Asia. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Vivek Raman, and I'm a Principal Knowledge Management Specialist here at ADB. As you know, the speakers before me have kind of elaborated on, the link between knowledge and innovation has never been stronger. The current pandemic, the current situation, knowledge management has come out as one of the key ingredients that is going to help us achieve the results we want to achieve in the world going forward. Innovation and knowledge management are one part of the ecosystem, and they are one. In ADB, we are fortunate to be in an organization where both of these have come very well together. And with the approval of our Knowledge Management Action Plan, the Innovation Hub is a natural progression in our maturity as a knowledge management organization. We've tried to keep our goal for the hub very simple. You might think, why is this so simple? But you all know innovation is such a journey and it requires such a culture change here. So step one of our goal is to create a culture of innovation within ADB. right? To make sure that we are building those capacities required to ultimately lead to the second goal of our hub, which is to provide developing member countries with innovative solutions, the kind of projects that everybody likes to see. We have three main goals here of how we plan to support our developing member countries. Step number one is learning, right? To make sure that we are giving them and increasing our knowledge and capacity on innovation. Second one is on connecting. We know we cannot do this journey alone. We need partners and we need them globally. And that is why we hope to be able to be that broker, to be that central node that connects us with solutions, as well as offers us a platform to be able to discuss and learn from one another. Step number three, which is probably our most complicated one, delivering innovative solutions. What do we think is innovative for Asia at the moment, Asia and the Pacific, and how can we in ADB play a small part in delivering that? We've decided to do this through four key service lines. Step number one, or service line number one, I should say, is applied learning and capacity building. As you know, if you want to help to be able to design innovative solutions, we need to be able to be on the cutting edge of learning and knowledge. So step goal number one or service line number one will help to improve staff's capacity to learn on innovation. Step number two is we cannot do this alone. Partnerships and networks, both internally within ADB as well as external, focusing not only in Asia but around the world. Step number three, and this is where the challenge gets more and more interesting, is innovation management. Just as the way knowledge needs to be managed, innovation does as well. And this is going to be focusing a little bit more inwards on ADB's capabilities to innovate and to be able to provide those solutions to our clients. And step number four, which is probably our most complicated service line, is applied innovation, to apply those tools that we have into projects that we want to design for our clients. We've already started a lot of work. We launched in October during the Knowledge Forum. And for the past 4 months, we have been awfully quiet, but you will see that we'll be coming out with a lot more exciting news and information in the coming months. And we've already lined up 7 interesting projects that we have adopted across ADB. Such as some of those include the Technology Innovation Challenge that ADB runs. We are working with Sri Lanka on integrated solutions. And how does this approach look? We have a tool called Futures in Foresight, and you will be seeing a little glimpse of that here a little later, where we'll be giving you a teaser into how that tool and methodology really works. And then a few other service lines that we have started. We're also very excited about our physical space. So if you want to innovate, we can't be sitting in our cubicles and trying to innovate. So ADB has been kind enough to dedicate some room for us to be able to do this kind of thinking and out-of-box thinking in a brand new space, hopefully coming up in December. Lastly, I want to just encourage you all to log on to our YouTube channel. We have some videos already put up on innovation, and please follow us on social media. But with this, I'd like to segue into 3 client testimonials. How are our clients really doing knowledge as well as innovation within Asia? And we're very, very proud to have some people who will be speaking about this. So enough of the ADB story, let's talk about real stories from the ground. And with that, I'd like to stop here and hand it back to Joe. Joe, over to you.
Yes, correct, Vivek. So at this point, we will hear concrete experiences where knowledge management and innovative tools are being used. We will have a panel to be moderated by Jane and again Vivek. So I'm giving it back to you, Vivek and Jane. Thank you.
Good afternoon again, and we're pleased in this afternoon that we are joined by 3 panelists, Director Nerissa Esguerra from the National Economic Development Authority, Silvia Capezoli from IMA International, and Tigran Shorokyan, the lead for Armenia National SDG Innovation Lab. And to co-moderate this panel with me is my colleague, Vivek Raman. Vivek?
Hi. So we have a very interesting panel with us today, and we promise our audience we'll be asking them some tough questions. We have not given them much guidance in what we would be asking them, but obviously we want to highlight some of the examples here of why knowledge, why innovation, and why do it now. Nerissa, my first question is to you, right? And I know we worked closely with your team on this. at the height of the pandemic, you continued the knowledge management agenda. And in the middle of the pandemic, you launched a knowledge management strategy. How did you make sure that that was the priority? And why did you prioritize it?
Okay, so well, first allow me to just backtrack a bit from my own point of view. Knowledge management has always been there in NEDA. In my early years as director in NEDA starting in 2013, I was aware that KM has always been there because after all, NEDA generates knowledge throughout the planning and policy making cycle. And so even as we also deal with disruptions like disasters. However, for some reason, during the rationalization plan or the restructuring of NEDA, the KM unit was dissolved. And but for several years, our unit, the development information staff, had focused more on communication and stakeholder engagement. But nonetheless, KM has always been at the back of our minds until we finally sat down to do the paperwork to create that KM division. This was in 2018 to 2019. And serendipitously, ADB came to NEDA in 2019 to present the Country Knowledge Program. And since I was there, I took the opportunity to mention our proposed KM division. And things unfolded quickly since then. And even the pandemic did not stop us. So we pushed through with a KM Light approach, as Vivek called it then. So we continued with the assessment. We did a survey. And we continued to present to the management committee. We had our leadership transition. We changed, there was a change of a secretary the cabinet, at the cabinet level. So there was a transition in our organization. And yet we really pushed through with it. We kept presenting our proposed KM division and strategy. And well, even the pandemic did not stop us, as I said, so we're still here.
Thank you, Derisa. Jane, over to you.
So I'm going to ask Sylvia a question, knowing that Sylvia has also been an important part of how we have introduced the KM strategy to NEDA. So Sylvia, for all the participants listening in, where do we really start with building KM capabilities, and how do we identify the what? How long does it really take to build that KM capacity?
It's $1 million question, isn't it, Jane? How long does it take? It's really interesting. I've just come out of a webinar with NEDA colleagues, as Director Nerissa knows, and it's all about building that awareness to start with. And one of the key things to think about is that we do knowledge management not for an end in itself. It's all KM that we do is to serve the purpose of the organizational mission or purpose, okay? So it's not a parallel process. So when people embark on investing time and energy into KM, it's really because they're trying to be more effective at what it is the organization is trying to do, you know? And one of the key things to think about is that it's not just about IT. It's not the focus on technology, which is sometimes an initial assumption, oh, KM equals information management equals technology. It doesn't necessarily. In fact, the most important thing in knowledge management is people, because it's the knowledge and experiences that we have, you know, in our heads, if you like, and it's trying to connect people together. So it's about supporting processes and systems, which of course include digital, but it's about supporting the connection between people and the sharing that allows that growth, that collective growth together. The other thing I wanted to say was that there's not only one way, Jane. You ask how long does it take? It really depends on your organizational context, your organizational culture, the enabling environment that you have within which you're operating, which can change over time, you know. So there are many different ways for organizations and agencies, you know, to strategize in terms of how they plan and in terms of, you know, improving their planning. So that's really quite important. What was I going to say? Some of the key things which NEDA is really an example of, is having a unit, as Nerissa was saying, you know, having some sort of representation, legitimate organizational representation in some form of unit, whether it's one person or a team of people, is great. Supporting that buy-in. Thinking about the demand, you've talked about that demand when you were giving your examples within ADB. The whole knowledge sharing and knowledge management process is a balance between demand and supply. Often we're on the supply side a lot and we wonder why people aren't interested. But it's also about really asking, what do our stakeholders need and want at this moment in time? What knowledge is it that they will benefit from and that they can work with? And that's really important when you're planning KM. You know, who are your audiences and what do they need in terms of support there? And the other key, sorry, I was going to ask you one last thing. The importance of human resources. You might come to that later, but the way that human resources in an agency or an organization can help institutionalize through our practices of, onboarding, offboarding, role-changing processes. So we all have that in organizations. It's nothing new, but it's about tapping into that and leveraging HR to support positive, constructive knowledge sharing, if you like.
The importance of people really cannot be understated. I fully agree with you, as well as, there's several components to KM. Vivek?
So thank you, Sylvia, for that. Lots of important points. Maybe we'll follow up later. I've been asked to remind our audience, if you have any questions, please do drop it in the chat box and we'll take it up in the Q&A section with our panelists, not just for our current panelists, but even for our speakers before, Suzanne Roth as well as Andreas. Tigran, let me ask you a little bit about, first, just tell us a little bit about the Armenia SDG Innovation Lab. And how did you convince your bosses that this is an important thing to do?
Thank you, Vivek, and thanks for the invitation to take part in this very interesting conversation. Basically, I'm Tigran from the Armenia's SDG Innovation Lab, which is co-founded by the government and the UN. It's a joint venture, basically, and one of the main key partners of ours is the government. And we are working to mainstream the innovation culture in the decision-making in the government, in the public sector institutions, to make them, the decision-making at the policy level, more evidence-based and citizen-centric. So while we are speaking about the knowledge management at decision levels, at all levels, basically, so we need to understand, while we are talking with our governmental partners, it's very important to avoid the misconception and misunderstanding about the knowledge management, that it not only refers to sharing and using the knowledge, basically, which is important, of course, but it requires creation of the knowledge to begin with, and which requires, in its turn, a certain environment to live up. The world has gone crazy in the recent years. The COVID, the war, the political rearrangements, etc., which affect the life of people, of course. And all of that happens on top of already existing challenges that are becoming more complex and intertwined, which requires approaches that are different. So while many of those problems are becoming hard to prevent, like those problems that are called by Nassim Taleb like black swans, but the others, this most significant part of those issues are preventable in their emerging phases and even in the crisis times. And though the problems are different, the remedy seems to be more common. We need to transform ourselves. We need to use the knowledge to create and use the knowledge for our benefit, to be more flexible and learn to be agile, to use the additional lenses, to explore new evidences and to bring new models of problem solving and communication into decision-making culture. But in the meantime, we need to acknowledge that the sustainable development goals remain the same. The governmental national objectives, they remain the same, basically, by and large. The governments, their institutions, the processes of decision-making, the tools they use, it all remains the same. And the inconsistencies between the urging and pressing issues and the lack of capacity or insufficient and ineffective capacities of the government create a crisis of decision-making, like decision paralysis, like when we speak in terms, does not allow to make very effective decisions. So the major shift we need is the mindset of decision makers, or on policy level and on the individual level among the citizens, like not to be guided by superstitions when it comes to urgent healthcare issues or healthcare provision as a service. And to talk about the knowledge management and transformation we have launched in Armenian landscape of public sector. So we are operating already for 4 years with having experimentation as one of our main principles, to test solutions, to test different approaches, to identify the problems and together with our partners in the government, to gradually come to the solutions of the problems with design thinking and foresight, to make the policy and service design like more citizen-centric and evidence-based, through using data analytics and artificial intelligence to automate the internal processes of the government, the digitalization to ease the service provision, and using the power of behavioral insights to guide the behavior of the citizens based on those policy objectives. But those standalone interventions are not enough, basically. And we need systemic transformation in the government, in the public sector, to make the change more lasting and sustainable. So we have decided to go through a very important but very difficult path. To complement the top-down approach of strategy implementation of public institutions transformation, we are going through the bottom up to creating the community of those problem solvers with open mind and with ability and willingness to learn, through deployment of innovation hubs in the public institutions. So I can more explore on the innovation hub later on when it comes to the questions.
I'll few follow-up questions I think Jane and I will ask, but at this point we wanted to open it up to our panelists, and feel free to jump in and to support anyone else's questions. But let me ask Nerissa. Nerissa, so much of what Sylvia and Tigran said, I think sometimes you are very modest in, making the case that, and the success that you have achieved with KM in the government. How did you get that resources? Because there's a lot of talk about resources and systemic transformation, as Tigran said, and you're doing it, right? And how are you making sure that your government counterparts are being patient? Because KM sometimes shows results very slowly.
Well, as I said, it was it's kind of opportunistic. When you presented a country knowledge program, I took it really, I took it as an opportunity to present what the vague idea of knowledge management, whatever we had back then. But then I think you were also instrumental in making things happen. Like you introduced us to futures and foresight and thinking. We had that workshop, so there was a taste of it, and people got interested, and so it was also related to our Ambition Natin 2040. For those who don't know it, there is. Back in 2015, we launched Ambition Natin 2040. It's a play on words. Filipino words that mean our vision, our ambition. The branding came later, of course. But among the motivations really for that long-term visioning process are one, then Secretary Arsenio Balisacan read the ADB publication, Asia 2050, that describes the future of Asia. And he was challenged by the fact that in the ADB report, the Philippines would be lagging far behind its neighbors in 2050, and he thought NEDA cannot allow this to happen, and we need to change the future. And number two, there had been recognition that development policies, programs, and reforms often get interrupted whenever a new president comes in. And so we started the long-term visioning process before the elections, and we made sure it was very consultative for it to be broadly owned. But just to connect KM and the futures thinking, let me repeat what Secretary Carl Chua said when we had this MOU signing ceremony with ADB in December 2020. And I quote, there is a lot to learn from NEDA's rich experience in planning, policy making, and program and project monitoring and evaluation that can prove to be valuable not just for NEDA or government, but for society in general. These are valuable not just today, but importantly also for the future. After all, it is through experience that we learn what works and what does not, under which circumstance. At the same time, as a planning agency, we also need to be attuned to emerging concerns, and to anticipate future developments. So that's the end of quote. And now we have KM strategy. We hope to drive innovation and transformation of mindsets so that we can future-proof development plans. And so as we continue ambition natin 2040, we also need to strengthen knowledge management, and we hope to sustain our initiatives as we go through another transition to a new administration this year.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, we're all closely looking at the Philippines elections in May. Do any of our other panelists want to react to what Nerissa just said? Sylvia, Tigran?
Particularly in the importance of developing our human resources that you have zeroed in, and making the business case for, what kind of competencies are we looking at to be able to manage our knowledge well. Sylvia?
Great question, Jane. Maybe that should go to Sylvia.
Yes.
Okay. No, I was linking, that initial thought about human resources. It's about the competencies are there. In a way, we've got competencies in our agencies and organizations. It's surfacing those, and it's recognizing those, and it's having leadership, of course, because I was just looking at the stream of questions in terms of supporting decision making. I mean, you need leadership, strong leadership as well. You need transparent and accountable leadership, don't you, in these in any agency or organization working forward. And what you need to think about as well is also representation. I mean, I was thinking of the bigger picture, representation of citizen voices, as Tigran was talking about. You need representation internally within the organization. So you need systems and processes that allow those voices to be heard across the spectrum. And that's where you can also have human resources that can support. We can talk about the link between, at a very level of a managerial supervisory level, where an individual staff member or employee in an agency feels accountable and feels a link to the bigger purpose and mission, but also therefore that they see their daily work as being legitimized and valued by the people who are directly managing them, line management support as well. So it's linking the values and purposes with the kind of nitty-gritty processes that we have of the way we manage people. Yeah, does that make sense, Jen?
Yeah, I do. So I want to make sure that the questions are coming in as well. And Tigran, I'll merge a question that I thought of along with one of the questions asked here. When it comes to the innovation lab that you're running in Armenia, how do you decide what's the specific research that you need to do, and how do you start collecting data on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Vivek. And then coming from the human resources side, of course, the innovations and changes are about learning, and learning are about the human resources. I mean, who is learning if not the public servants working in the public institutions? But when we speak about the institutional level of having the human resources able to learn and to apply the learnings in their daily work, while policymaking or service design or service delivery to the citizens and private sector entities. It's about institutional arrangements and the leadership that Celia was talking about, but not only the leadership, of course. So on the one hand, we need the leadership, the strategic objectives, etc., the whole institutional design. But on the other hand, we need the critical number of those problem solvers, those people who are open-minded, that are learning about the problems, not just only about the solutions that are coming from the top to down, but also identification of those problems and co-designing of the solutions together with those beneficiaries for whom the solutions are meant to be delivered to. So from this perspective, it is becoming not hard, basically, to identify the problems we need to face, to identify the methods and the tools that we need to apply, and to advocate for change in the government. So there are many cases when we are getting the requests from the governmental partners, like from the Prime Minister's office, from the Deputy Prime Minister's office, and from the ministers themselves. But on the other hand, we are able to advocate for change that we have generated the agenda or set the agenda ourselves through generation of those insights and the knowledge together with our partners in the public institutions at the lower level and at the middle level, and through our work with the beneficiaries, like we are doing with the design thinking methodology, to go to ask and to talk to those people who even themselves, they don't perceive their problems identically as they are. So they are human, and we are identifying and understanding those people, the human nature and human character of those people, because how we make the decisions is not always rational, and in many cases we are making our decisions on the emotional side. So if we don't understand those human beings as psychological, with their psychological biases, with the behavioral barriers to the behaviors that we need to guide them, so we will be unable to change something both in the public sector institutions and in the society as well.
That's great. Tigran, that's a good segue for a question that we've got here for Nerissa. Nerissa, then, if people are all making emotional decisions, how can we support governments as an agency such as yourself in good decision making?
Well, our secretary really is evidence-based, so he's really data-driven. He would really look for data, for evidence to support it. Of course, we also need to be sensitive to people's popular sentiments. So that's a challenge we constantly face. Acknowledging what people feel. They don't always believe in evidence, in data, but the important thing is there has to be a way of acknowledging their emotions, what they're going through, their current realities, and that's why we actually listen to them, to their aspirations when we did Ambition Natin 2040. As long as we do not lose sight of those aspirations of people, but then we also present the data. What do we have? What we need to make them understand? What are our constraints in terms of budget, for example? We are all competing for limited resources, so we need some kind of economic literacy as well. And so that's one of the challenges we face in NEDA. The constant balancing of interests. So if we can present evidence, if we can present all the studies that are available, then that would be helpful.
I think evidence-based is a good way to kind of also remind everyone that our time is almost up. It's amazing how time flies. Jane, should we ask a last question to our panelists because we talked about the why they are doing it. We touched a little bit about how. Should we ask them a little bit about challenges? We'll open it up to anyone who wants to take it. What has been the biggest challenge? I heard a lot about champion-driven, right? And people need to be interested, getting them interested. I'll open this question to all three of you for what was your biggest challenge in the KM and innovation journey you had so far? Who wants to go first?
I can take it. To begin with, to be very, very short, because we are lack of time. So probably the level of absorption of innovation and information and evidence is probably one of the basic and most important challenges that we are facing, and that leads us to creating the capacity in the public sector institutions in the forms of innovation hubs, so that we can have the critical number of those people who can understand and absorb the information, new evidences that we are generating to design thinking, like data analytics, to behavioral change, etc. But we need those people in the governments to understand us and to get the evidence as basis for their decision making. This is probably the most important challenge that we are having.
Evidence. Nerissa, your challenge, and I'll throw in one last question that might be related to your answer. How do you sell KM?
I think we can ask Sylvia, since she has been promoting KM across several organizations.
Either or, whoever. Nerissa, you go first.
It's Nerissa probably has in reality, I'm working with different organizations. How do you sell it? It's you're trying, like you said, you're trying to get champions, and you've got to start small, and you start with the people who believe in this in a way, and get those creative and innovative thinkers.
Start
Nerissa,
Start small. Okay, Nerissa.
Start small is a good one. Start small. And pilot.
Start small. Mm-hmm. Start with the current challenges. What the struggles. They do, where to get information. It's always a struggle for us. And then just keep at it. Keep talking to people and presenting all these and listening to their concerns. And as long as you just keep at it. I believe that's
so persistent. So we've got evidence, we've got persistence.
Data. Champions.
And champions. Okay, so those are some of the challenges. Andreas, I wanted to ask you, because there is a question here that we thought we can ask you to respond to as well. Andreas, do you want to come into that? How do you
thank you very much. Thank you. I think the answers that have been given have been quite smart. Sylvia, I would confirm. I would not even sell knowledge management to sectors that are not interested at all. That has always been difficult. If you focus on those who are already interested, you have enough to do, because there is a lot of interest in knowledge management, by the way. But let me point out one very important point. And I'm addressing all those politicians and governmental representatives that are here with us. Having a knowledge agenda for a sector or for your country is not a burden, believe me. It is the best thing that can happen to you, because all the stakeholders and citizens in your sector and country significantly depend on knowledge. The children spend their life with learning, the teachers, the parents, the students, the academics, the businesses which are knowledge-driven, all the special interest groups, they all depend on knowledge and they know it. And if you give them an answer and tell them, we have an agenda, we know what are your knowledge goals, we can address it, we have an approach, you will be loved by everybody. Believe me, knowledge is a resource that everybody likes. It's not that you are burdening them with knowledge. The opposite is the case. If you have a knowledge agenda, it will make you different in the political scenery. Everybody is talking about environment today, so how do you distinguish and differentiate? But if you have a knowledge agenda, it is outstanding. Please run for it. Convince your citizens, your organizations with a consistent, smart, well-planned knowledge agenda, and you will shine as a politician. That is my contribution.
Andreas, that's fantastic. I can't think of a better way to conclude this panel. And I would like to, of course, thank our panelists. But what I like most is that knowledge management is how you differentiate yourself from doing what others are doing. And this is actually a selling point. So we don't have to work that hard to sell KM at all. I think with that, thank you, Tigran. Thank you, Nerissa. Thank you, Sylvia, for joining us. And I think our participants have greatly benefited because most of them are from the government or local government level. And we hope this was useful for you as well. And I can't think of a better segue now to Nguyen Quong from Vietnam, who is actually using knowledge to differentiate the ADB resident mission, to kind of give us a little bit of conclusion on what he heard from the government and what ADB in Vietnam is doing to respond to it. Quang, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Vivek, and fantastic and really refreshing, a discussion, and I follow it. And I'm not going to, go into what in detail what we did. Basically, as it was already presented by Jane, our process is starting with the survey and then coming up with mapping the demand supply and then coming up with the country knowledge plan. But I really like what Sylvia said, because Sylvia actually nicely put the framework on what I'm going to say. So 3 points. One is we're talking about supply and demand, and we're talking about try to make our knowledge support is demand driven. Where are we in that equation? Are we in the supply side or are we in the demand side? We always assume that we are in the supply side, and then the country is in the demand side. And then we have to always educate ourselves. We need to make our support demand driven. Are we sure that now we still in the supply side? I don't really think so. We also in the demand side. Think about that. Knowledge now by the countries now from Vietnam, for example, is enormous. And do we really understand it? So I think we need to rethink a little bit about that, because when we assume that we are in the supply side, the strategy is different. But we are actually in both. We are in the supply side and we are also in the demand side. So I think, and then we look at the countries now. Look at Vietnam, for example. Vietnam is completely different from like 30 years ago when ADB came to Vietnam. When ADB came to Vietnam, by that time, everything ADB said, Vietnam listened. But now look at the expertise in Vietnam. 200,000 students every year study from advanced countries, US, American, Germany, you name it. They coming back to Vietnam. They work every sector. And now we come there and tell them, here's the knowledge from ADB. What is the unique? So I think we have to rethink about where we are first. We are in the supply and demand. Then the game will be different, and the knowledge management will be different. So in that thinking, we're also thinking in the next knowledge plan survey, we also try to think what we need from Vietnam rather than what Vietnam needs from us as well. So that's my first point. My second point is also from the operational. We often link at the country level. We often link knowledge with operations, and we often have a response saying, is it linked to the operations? If it's not really linked to operations, we don't need to finance it. We need to delink it. Knowledge not necessarily linked to operations. If we always try to link it to operation, it's not going to be knowledge. Like Sylvia said, it's about connecting people. It's not about strengthening our landing operations in Vietnam. But there's still views about that. And then especially now, given our DA resources are limited, and DA resources actually now is still prioritized for sector, and when we approach for resources, always the answer is it linked to lending? Can it increase lending? I think it's time to delink it. The third point I want to say is also very practical at the country level is there's enormous knowledge in both sides, supply side and demand side. And the very practical obstacle is translation. I have to be very, very minor issue, but it's a greatest bottleneck. I can tell you that even for this SEAD, this conference, we asked for a participation from a local province. He's a chairman, but at the end the answer was no, we cannot provide translation. So then that's it. And then we see everything in Vietnam, we need to translate. But there's no translation. The resources, very limited. So we're talking about huge amount of knowledge in other language, huge amount of knowledge in local language, but there's no translation service, very limited. So we're talking about macro picture, but when we're down to the operational level, things like that being obstructed, really obstructed. So I stop here.
Thank you so much, Kuang. It's a very insightful discussion and how Vietnam Resident Mission is actually planning knowledge support for the country. So we are now into our last part of our session. It's a very interactive session on the role of knowledge management in policy dialogue using strategic foresight. May I again introduce to you Susan Roth, our Chief Knowledge Management, and Bayarma Amarjargal, the KM Specialist. Over to you.
I'm looking forward to seeing you in person, hopefully all very soon. One thing that we learned as we engaged in really deep strategic conversations about knowledge management in the bank, where we want to go, how we want to achieve ADB's corporate goals with knowledge management. What we learned is we really need to use strategic foresight, because what we agreed today, I think, is that the game is changing, right? It's not anymore about who has knowledge and who hasn't. It's about what kind of knowledge do we all have? How do we collaborate? And what do we need to use it for? So it's about how do we create actually public value for citizens in all of the countries, in obviously our region, but generally in the world. So the question really comes, how can we develop new policies with knowledge that we might not even have yet? How can we create actually policies that emerge from visions and not only from learning from the past. And obviously this is becoming so critical as we all enter new territories, right? No one in the world has completed an energy transition. No one has a fully green economy. No one has really achieved equality in all aspects, especially when it comes to gender equality. So what we want to discuss with you today and do a little exercise is how future thinking and foresight works. So again, we are all very good at learning from the past. Many of us believe that knowledge management means we capture knowledge and put it in some kind of repository and find it in the future. But I think we learned from the conversation in the panel that this is not what knowledge management really is about anymore. It's about connecting people, ensuring knowledge flows, and ensuring it's actually applied to problems. And this is where the learning from the future now comes in. And obviously learning from the future is extremely difficult, especially for us bureaucrats, right? Because we are not used to that level of creative thinking. We are not even used to thinking outside group thinking, right? We are used to aligning with what someone else, maybe our bosses or supervisors or so are thinking. So it is very, very difficult. But I think what we also realize is that actually the unimaginable is now happening, right? I mean, who had imagined that it takes 2 years to open schools in some of the countries? Who had imagined that, economies would kind of reverse and all the gains we've made in the SDGs would actually be reversed? And who would imagine that we now have a big conflict among all the other different conflicts we have already in the world? So this is where future thinking really comes in. It allows to talk about the impossible. It allows to talk about things that might happen in the future, but then often we see they happen a lot faster than we think. And this is the interesting aspect about it. I don't know if you've heard about the 3 horizons, right? Often what we do is we actually look at the present and we look at the present problems. And this is what constantly keeps us very busy. And we try to manage knowledge, we just solve and survive the present problems. But as we manage the present, we have to think about the next phase, the next horizon already, because these disruptors might affect us. Think about technology. Think about the policies we are now developing to address issues of data privacy, data security, the cybersecurity threats that might come, but we are not yet actually applying that knowledge to regulate or develop new anticipatory policies. And let's even go further. There is a 3rd horizon here, which is maybe 10 to 20 years. And obviously we have to think about it now because our development plans will only be implemented by the time that 10, 15, 20 years have actually passed. So this is where foresight comes in. We have actually published a book about it. You can find it on adb.org. Future and Thinking in Asia Pacific, where we share some of our experience. And we really want to share, promote, and use future thinking and foresight in knowledge management because it's a great way to look at risk management, which is obviously an important, role of knowledge management. Use knowledge to manage risks of new policies, of development plans, of investments. Then you need knowledge management to look at strategy and design. What's the vision for a certain sector, a country, a collaboration? And for that, you need actually foresight. And actually studies showed that private sector companies which use foresight are performing a lot better. And there are now also many governments which are using strategic foresight. To name a few in Asia, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Korea, are embracing future thinking and foresight. Just to give you an example, what does this mean, right? Thinking about the impossible. I think this is a great quote which summarizes it all. I mean, in 1882, who thought we should actually invest in telecommunication, right? I mean, someone here said, why on earth would we need telephones? We can easily send boys, servants, soldiers to exchange messages. What we need are better roads, right? So that's, I think, an important question we can ask also now. What kind of investments do we really need? What are the emerging issues that we need to consider when we think about what knowledge we need for the development of countries? And at the end, that's about improving the lives of people. So one way to do it is to apply various tools which come from future thinking and foresight. Future thinking and foresight is actually a social science. It started in the mid of the last century, has been developed throughout the years. There are universities which teach future thinking and foresight, and it really helps us. It provides really structured tools to think about the future and then make sense of it. And of course, this is only, a 10-minute kind of dive into future thinking and foresight, but we would love, if you're interested, to have more conversations with you. ADB hosts the future, or helps to host with UNESCO together, the Future Thinking and Foresight Chairs Network in Asia Pacific. These are think tanks and universities in Asian countries, which help governments and advise governments on future thinking and foresight. So what we want to do now is a quick emerging issues analysis. So an emerging issues analysis helps us and helps policymakers to identify not only the problem, right? That's what we are very used to. And I think a classic example is during COVID. The problem was we were thinking that we would have a massive issue with mortality from COVID and of course an overflow of people to hospitals. But we didn't maybe look at trends. And I think one question here from an LGU person was, well, what happens with all the unintended consequences? And maybe we didn't even think 2 years ago about the emerging issues, which are maybe issues like conflict, societal challenges, mental health issues, and of course, a total economic stabilization of the whole world. So this is where, 2 years ago, emerging issue analysis would have really helped, I think, policymakers to make a lot better planning and policies for responding to the pandemic. So let's exercise this now together. And I know it's a bit of a challenge. I have to see your questions or your answers, which you will now have to drop in the Q&A section in my chat box. And if we can now switch, Bama, the screen so that we can actively participate. Maybe before we do this, we will now go together with all of you in this audience to think about knowledge management problems that we currently have, or maybe knowledge problems. We'll think about trends, and then we will continue to think about what's on the horizon, the weak signals, the emerging issues. While we do that, I want to give you an example, right? We recently did an interesting study for the transport sector. You can find it also online. It's called Reimagining the Transport Sector. And we applied various future thinking and foresight tools. And one of them was to identify some of the emerging issues which are relevant for the transport sector. So in these cards of emerging issues, which we now call trend, it's a mix of trend and emerging issues, actually more of trends. We have these trend cards, which then can be used to think about approaches for transport planning in countries. So for example, one would be advanced technologies, the issue of energy resources, the issue of economic and trade patterns, geopolitical issues. So this is just to give you an example of what we mean with trends and how they border to emerging issues. So with that, I'm stopping to share my slides now, and I'll ask Bama to share her screen. And maybe we can already see if you have some thoughts on what are current problems to knowledge management or knowledge, for which you need knowledge, that you need solutions for. So if I can look at the question and answers, and maybe while you, the audience, is already thinking about it, maybe you have to kind of digest the concepts of future thinking and foresight, I can turn here to our panel and maybe already hear from our panel. Maybe I'll ask Sylvia, what do you see as some of the current problems in knowledge management for development?
Okay, we have to focus on the futures, don't we? I was thinking, Suzanne.
That's good.
No, actually, I was thinking about this yesterday, actually, when I looked at when you shared your presentation, actually. I was thinking from the perspective of, well, different things. We talked about citizen voices, hearing voices. So participation, that's ongoing, and it needs to improve, okay, somehow. We need to hear citizen voices in some way. But the other one I was thinking of was the type of world I've lived in over the past 50 years, and I've only had a few different serious jobs. My teenage son is going to have 3 times as many jobs in his life, maybe more. So the whole way that a generation of people is being educated to live their lives and be employed, hopefully in some way, that's going to change. So we've got to think of that. Governments have to think of that in terms of planning.
I think this is a great point, Sylvia, on this issue. I mean, there maybe we can list down already, Bama, as one of the trends, which you didn't specifically talk about, Sylvia, but which we are seeing is artificial intelligence, right? That's a trend.
Yeah. Yeah, the replacement of that in terms of
the
jobs,
replacement, yes, exactly, replacement of that. And some people think this will be the solution to all our knowledge problems. We just ask a question and that artificial intelligence will give us an answer. But maybe I want to hear from Andreas. I know you want to say something else maybe, but on the artificial intelligence, I think that's where the interesting and important understanding of what knowledge is comes in, because it includes human judgment. How do you see an emerging issue there? How important is knowledge management if we move to automation and artificial intelligence?
I personally think that artificial intelligence plays a very important, crucial role in the future of knowledge management, because the amount of available knowledge is becoming so huge and the dynamics so big that we cannot even know which knowledge is available. So we need artificial intelligence tools to help us find things that we have not even been looking for. I think that is one of the key elements of artificial intelligence. But as you rightly say, artificial intelligence is not a machine that is ready-made and then you will know everything. It's in an integrated approach, and specifically AI tools build on what currently is highly in discussion, the so-called knowledge graphs. The knowledge graphs are semantic layers that represent a knowledge domain and connect the knowledge resources that are usually siloed and reside somewhere. And the linkages between the various silos, that is what also makes the knowledge hubs successful. And the linkages can be in a digital way. That's why we need knowledge graphs and artificial intelligence. But we also need to link them in a social context. The siloed approach is one of the most critical challenges in knowledge management. We are working on knowledge in academia, but it does not reach the politicians. We are working on new technologies, but it does not reach the farmers, and so on. That is why we need to link the various partners in the knowledge ecosystem. Please think about this term, knowledge ecosystem. When we are growing plants, we know in the soil you have various minerals, water, this and that. The same is with knowledge. Knowledge is not one thing that you have. It is a complex topic, and we need to think about knowledge ecosystems, and we need knowledge partnerships to do that, because there is nobody who knows everything about the knowledge ecosystem.
I think what you said, Andreas, is an interesting point here coming from the audience, and that is, one thing, and maybe it's a trend, hopefully it's already a trend, is a change of perception of top-down. Knowledge is top-down. No, knowledge is actually something that is on equal, footing, and it is created in a collaborative setting, and we have to understand different perspectives. I think that's the change we are seeing. Right? It's not anymore about right and wrong. It actually depends on your perspective and where you are in a country, what roles you have, and so on. So maybe one more point, Bama, if you can use silo to our current problems, because it's not really an emerging issue. Silo is the problem we have right now. And I think that's one of the problems we will have to really address as we move to the increasingly complex development challenges, right? The concept of livable cities, the concepts of green economy, they require us to break these silos and really think differently and think probably more laterally. So I hope we answered this question on, or we didn't answer it, but we hopefully gave hope to the question from Nathan on how we are including more indigenous knowledge and changing from top-down approaches, so really more stakeholder consultations and partnerships. And we're not talking about elite partnerships among kind of the same kind of organizations, but new and diverse partnerships. We have another question here, which is interesting, and that is, and maybe it's also something that we need to consider as a trend, and that is knowledge management the same as talent management? Maybe Sylvia, do you want to think about that, or say where are the trends with talent management and knowledge management, especially if we say that all knowledge sits with people?
Yes, that's true. But I suppose talent management is specifically when you're looking, within organizations and looking for those creative, innovative thinkers. That's true, but it's not the same, is it? No. Talent management and I think you might be able to explain it better, Suzanne, in terms of your ADB kind of tactics. But it's talent management is one strategy that an organization would have in the way that it's recruiting and ensuring it's got the right people. Yeah. And knowledge management is the bigger,
Exactly. And I think maybe one way to answer it is, especially I think government organizations have to improve talent management to keep people interested to actually work with governments and to actually deliver on public purpose and value. So there is actually even more need now for governments and government agencies to invest in knowledge management, because that makes a job a lot more attractive. And maybe Narissa, if you're on the call here, maybe is that something that resonates with you, the trend to provide a lot better knowledge management to your younger staff, that they are interested in that because they benefit from it with their career progression?
Yes, certainly. And I would also like to pose this challenge. There's this one of the emerging trends or issues is work from home, which has become a necessity and was widely adopted during the pandemic. But then there's this constant tension between perceptions of bosses and employees, with bosses having, they're not really confident that they extract the level of productivity that they wanted from employees. And I was wondering whether knowledge management can mitigate this tension, and is it possible that a new family of knowledge management practices or so we say apps might aid in the transformation of work in a manner that grants autonomy while strengthening accountability and trust relationships instead of the possible turn towards work-related surveillance? So I think
that's great. Yeah, that's a very interesting point, right? How do you actually, an emerging issue will be to change the way we see work. Work will increasingly be about collaboration, the knowledge we share. That is difficult to capture. Maybe Tigran, you work in an innovation hub. Do you have already some innovative ideas about how we would capture and how we would create accountability for collaboration and knowledge sharing and new ways of working?
Yeah, thanks, Susan, for the question. And that is a challenge that was very tricky and triggered us to go through a strategic decision with the government to embed those innovation hubs, to conceptualize basically the innovation hubs and to embed them into public sector institutions to create a culture of collaboration, culture of learning, culture of creating knowledge and using the created knowledge, not only based on the knowledge of the problems that are in the past, as you have mentioned, but also to do some foresight exercises, horizon scanning, to identify those problems that we can anticipate in the future and to try to map the solutions that can be adaptable for the Armenian landscape and the certain public institution that can bring a solution to a problem that is relevant for today or for tomorrow in the meantime. And there is a tool set that we have already developed in the SDG Innovation Lab so that we can offer to those innovation hubs in the public institutions to apply having in mind the SDG Innovation Lab as a role model for them, to create the same capacities and to go through the same processes to standardize the processes of decision-making in the public institutions. So this is something that is very relevant and important to not only to create something new, but also to standardize a decision-making process that is more innovative, more creative, and encourages collaboration between not only the public servants working in the same institution, but also to invite their stakeholders, their main partners and beneficiaries to co-design the same, to go through the same process together with them.
I like that, Tigran. I think what you're saying is, as we move into new focus areas of work and a new understanding of what work is, especially in the space of policymakers, of development organizations, we might need more standardized processes, which is actually, right, the essence of knowledge management. Knowledge management is a well-coordinated process to manage knowledge. And I think that's what we are offering, right, to all of you, our participants from government, but also from other organizations, that we help you and we would collaborate together on enhancing how knowledge is managed so that it can be brought to best use to improve the life of people in Asia Pacific. And I think maybe the last point here, and I know we're running out of time, I only have 2 more minutes, is how do we know, and maybe it's a question now for everyone here, and the first one who raises their hands, please answers. How do we know the knowledge we have is relevant and the right kind of knowledge?
Susanne, while others are thinking, we also shared this link of Google slide in the description of the session. So we encourage participants to also respond to the questions through this slide.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Bama. So maybe I'll see here. Does anyone raise their hand here from our experts joining this event? Let me see here. Yeah, Andreas, please. In one sentence, how do we know it's the right kind of and it's relevant knowledge? What are the emerging issues there?
Let me be provocative and say we never know exactly what is relevant. But coming back to the talent management, we need to foster the pluralism, the diversity, so that we have several approaches to knowledge. We have the talents that themselves bring ideas and bring solutions, and we shall specifically provide a marketplace for the best solutions and the knowledge that is available. That includes also the indigenous knowledge. It has been raised in the discussion. Also, indigenous knowledge is relevant and it should be included in our discussions. There is no one who knows everything and who knows what is the right knowledge. But we have to provide the framework in which the various approaches and knowledges can be heard and can be relevant to the community. That would be my answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andreas. And I think we had a very interesting conversation. This was a mix of a more academic conversation about what knowledge management is. If you want to learn more about it, please visit ADB's website and check out the Knowledge Management Action Plan of ADB, which includes a glossary and more information. There are also various videos. We then actually went further and discussed why knowledge management is so critical to development and why we need to invest in knowledge management. Then we provided examples from countries and from ADB. And then we had more conversations about the right kind of mix between demand and supply of knowledge, the need to learn from each other at various levels of stakeholders, including the indigenous knowledge. And we finished with an emerging issues analysis, which kind of started to discuss what are the emerging issues in knowledge. And I think what we all agree, it's about collaboration, and it's about having a strong sense of integrity and purpose, that the knowledge we have as development organizations and governments need to be brought to the best use of the people we serve. And with that, I wish you a wonderful rest of the afternoon, and I do hope to see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.